Right. Welcome back to The Chase, the show that dives deep into the world of high performance alongside some of the world's most esteemed athletes, influential leaders, and ambitious individuals. I'm your host, Christian Dyer. Today, I'm super excited and grateful to have on Gavin Pratt, who serves as the Director of Strength and Conditioning at the UFC Performance Institute in Las Vegas, Nevada. Gavin has had the opportunity to work with elite athletes across many sports, including MMA, surfing, handball, and boxing. Gavin has over 20 years of experience training both elite level athletes and the general population in strength and conditioning. So without further ado, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much, Christian. And again, like I said before off air, thanks so much for your patience in waiting to get me on. It's been a mission.
Yeah, well, I mean, considering the hectic schedules that you have and I have, I'm stoked to be able to find some time and start picking your brains and hopefully have a conversation that can give tremendous value to everyone listening.
Absolutely.
So how are you? What are you up to? I know you're in LA. Give the audience a little bit of insight into your life right now.
Yeah, it's always chaotic, but that's like the sport I work in, I guess. So kind of suits nicely. Right now I'm in LA just for the day. Head back to Vegas after this. Had to get my son's passport, so he's a true Australian now. But yeah, look, life on a day-to-day is always different, and I think that's one of the challenges, but also one of the cool things about what I do.
Take me back, what drew you to strength and conditioning, performance, and why?
It's probably best answered by a lot of S&C coaches in that we wanted to be professional athletes at some point, and for whatever reason, it fell through. And a lot of the time we might have been the people that weren't the most talented, but we worked pretty hard to get the most out of ourselves. And that's where I fell in love with the gym is I got injured quite a lot playing Australian rules football. So my body probably couldn't hold up to the stress of it, especially back when I was playing. There was a lot of miles put under the belt. So I was in the gym a fair bit with rehab and strength training, and that's where I sort of started thinking, this would be a pretty cool job to have. It wasn't a massive role when I was growing up. There's probably, phys ed teachers in Australia were the guys that took your S&C, and then it started to become a bit more professional. And I was fortunate enough that the Australian rules footy team that I played for, the coach asked if I'd want to practice my craft when I retired at the ripe age of 20 to help with the Colts team, the under-18s team. And so that's where I started as a 20-year-old and then worked up to the league team and kicked off from there.
Wow. Okay. What does high performance mean to you?
I think it's optimizing not only how an athlete can perform, but it's also how the human can perform as well. So I do think that there's two different components there. And literally this morning there was an article that I read about it treating the athlete like a car. You have the driver inside and you can work on the components that are like more tactical and thought processing movements. And then you have the car itself, which is the body, things like let's make you jump higher, run faster, be stronger. And so I do think there's two really distinct components to that. And if we look at it from a martial arts point of view, this is something that our head coach in Shanghai Performance Institute, Dean Amersinger, speaks about a lot. He talks about the FMA model, which is world champions in MMA are going to generally comprise of those three components. So the F is a fighter, someone that just loves to brawl. You've got the martial artist who's very highly skilled at a particular martial art, whether it's wrestling, jiu-jitsu or striking. And then you have the athlete, which is the jump high, run fast, be strong. And so as strength and conditioning coaches, we tend to focus on the A component, the athlete. We're building the car. And then you have the technical coaches that work on the driver or the fighter martial artist component of the FMA.
And you got to think, as you know, even as I'm kind of learning as I go in the world of professional and international sports, it becomes such a lifestyle. It's not something that you switch on when you enter the Performance Institute doors, nor for the athletes. And it's not something that I switch on when I put my boots on and I step in the 4 white lines. So it really comes down to my sleeping habits, my eating habits, my recovery habits. Am I happy? My confidence, my relationships. That's where I really think the best high performers get it right, is when they're so in tune with all components of their life, not just the title or the sport or whatever, whatever's asked for them when they check in.
Yeah, they're all stresses, right?
Really?
So, we often look at performance outcomes, but we forget about the human outcomes and the things that are going on in everyday life. And I always remember this story when I was down at Surfing Australia, just doing some hours as an intern down there with a mentor of mine, Jeremy Shepherd. And I remember him saying to me, these athletes, we got to turn them off after the S&C session if that's the last thing they're doing. Because think about it, these guys are surfers, they're going surfing, they're jazzed up, then they get in the car, they turn the music on, they come to the gym, turn the music on again, let's go, we're getting after it, and then they drive home in the car, and then you want them to sleep properly. It's like, when is this autonomic nervous system dropping down or going into parasympathetic? It doesn't. You're just on high alert all the time. So the ability to switch on and switch off that component, I think, is also really important.
It's hard. I mean,
it's really difficult, man.
First-hand experience,
yeah.
Oh my God. And so I had on Nick Littlehills, who's this elite sport coach. He's worked with Manchester United, Team Great Britain, F1, drivers and franchises. And we talk about how our approach to sleep and recovery is so wrong, where we think it's when we get home, when we turn the lights off, get in bed, and then we sit there and we're like, why can't I sleep?
Yeah.
Well, there's
what did you do leading up to it? Exactly.
100%. There's no pill that's just going to get you to fall asleep. There's no supplement. There's no drink. There's nothing really that you can do except be cognizant about, what you do from the time you wake up to what you do the time you actually get in bed. And it's those moments. Can I deregulate? Can I take some stress away from my life? Maybe even breath work. There's so many other things, but it's this all-encompassing approach where it's not just a simple fix, or there's not just one training plan that Gavin Pratt can prescribe to an athlete. It's a pretty holistic approach.
Absolutely. And if we think about athletes or anyone that works in elite sport, it's always about performance optimization or getting that 1% better every day. Now, how do you turn the wheels off when you lie in bed from doing that? Because I don't know about you, but my brain is just constantly going like this.
It's nonstop.
Right? And I think that's what has got us to where we are, but that is really difficult to turn off. So there's positives and negatives to that.
100%. Okay, so you've gone from handball, surfing, working in China for their games, and now you're working with specifically UFC athletes. So what's been the biggest learning curve, moving between different codes, and how has that changed your approach to S&C?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, the greatest information that I've got throughout those sports is not the sports themselves. Obviously, we need to look at a needs analysis for each sport and what's important for optimal performance in that sense. But my biggest learning was the cultural differences from being in China to being in Western society, or East versus West, whatever it happens to be, and sort of taking the mix, because I think both cultures do it really well, and there's also mistakes and issues in both cultures as to how we approach sporting performance. So I've been really fortunate to see both sides, and I've certainly used both sides in my practice as well, and understanding whether it's load management or how much people are capable of without looking at science and thinking, oh, you're going to be tired, neuromuscular fatigue from that. It's like, well, I have seen a fair bit going on, and they've been able to handle it quite well. So finding that balance has been really important, and understanding that it all comes back to the individual and that athlete-centered approach as to, well, we could have a squad of a team, but within those 20 athletes, you're going to need something different. And for me, that was the most important thing starting up the S&C program in Shanghai. It's an academy program. So we have about 26 to 30 athletes in the facility, and we often train them like you would a team sport in the gym, let's say. So now I've got 15 athletes in the gym at one time, but we need to remember it's a solo or individual pursuit, this sport. So how am I going to best individualize what we're doing in the gym to make sure that that athlete is getting what they need in a team environment? We also have male and females. We also have different weight classes. We also have different backgrounds, whether it's a grappler, striker, something along those lines. So this is where the diagnostics come in, and then the creativity of programming comes to the forefront.
And how are you guys approaching that individualized plan? Are there force plates, which is what I'm familiar with from UC Berkeley using, Sparta Science, or is there any sort of body moving signature that you guys are really, really looking into to individualize that programming?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the most exciting part of my job, I think, is where, our motto is to accelerate the evolution of MMA, particularly with S&C for my area. And what we've done is we've come up with tier 1 and tier 2 diagnostics. So the tier 1 diagnostics are the 4 main tests that we believe help us profile the athlete in accordance with MMA. And then the tier 2 tests are anything sort of extra a little bit that we can add more color to the athlete's program for and individualize it further. So in Shanghai, as an example, we would have tests across the group, and then we would be able to program based on something termed phenomenology. So this is what type of phenom are you? And so if you're a force deficient athlete, you need more maximal strength, we would term you an antelope. So you're already pretty fast, you need to increase your strength. If you're already really strong but a little bit too slow, you'd be an elephant. So we need to make sure that we work on more velocity, higher velocity based lifts. And then if you've got a great balance between them, which is kind of where we want you from an athletic standpoint, you'd be considered a tiger. And so from that, we would then split in the athletes into those categories. And let's use a bench press as an example. We might have velocity-based training with the gym awares. If you're a force-deficient athlete, we might want you to lift really heavy clusters of 222 at a particular velocity. If you're a tiger, we want to get that middle ground, really focus on power. So maybe it's a 444 cluster, working at a higher velocity. And then again, as you can imagine, with the elephants who are already strong but need to work on their velocity, we're going to work on something called high volume power training. So obviously in sport, it's great to have one punch power in our sport, but we want to be able to repeat that across 3 to 5 rounds as well. So repeat power ability is really crucial for our athletes. So high volume power training actually enables the athlete to be able to do this, and we just need to make sure that we use some kind of auto-regulation tool to make sure that the speed or the velocity that they're lifting at is appropriate to the adaptation we're trying to get.
What type of tests are you guys doing to, I guess, identify which animal group they'd fit into?
Sure. So we utilize a loaded counter movement jump profile for that particular phenomenology-based testing, because at the moment upper body profiling in our sport isn't as accurate. There isn't as much research on it, but we're in the process of developing something called a jammer punch throw, and we'll do a loaded diagnostic for the upper body profiling as well, but that's just in the works at the moment. We do an isometric mid-thigh pull, and we also now have started creating, probably for the last 12 months, we do a neck profile on the force frame. And we look at the 4 different vectors, flexion, extension, and lateral flexion. We look at the specific ratios that we should be targeting for our athletic population, and then we integrate neck training into our S&C to ensure that we decrease the risk of concussion and also mitigate the injury risk, because obviously with grappling there's a fair bit going on as well. So long story long, tier 1 loaded counter movement jump profile is how we diagnose, I guess, the phenomenology of an athlete at this stage.
Jeez. What about, how do you guys find that balance between focusing on an athlete's strengths versus weaknesses? And we can even break it down as in UFC athlete has, world-class striking ability, but maybe his conditioning is suffering. And so it's about continuing that striking ability, because that's probably what has won him majority of his fights. But it's also, hey, he could be facing an opponent that has an insane chin with a long, I guess, like anaerobic and aerobic system. So he needs to be able to go 5 rounds if it's a championship fight.
Absolutely. And so what I was saying before is sort of like a general rule of thumb. Obviously, there's plenty of conversations going on, because if you're a fighter and you say to us, look, man, the striking's what got me here. I don't want to lose that speed and velocity by getting too strong, if there's such a thing.
Yeah.
But a lot of it, as you say, if it's an athlete-centered approach, then we need to listen to the athlete and the coach as to what they want from it. So we're quite happy to go, all right, well, you're really good at speed. Let's continue doing that. Generally speaking, what we're looking to do is if a fighter has a fight, they go home, they take 2 to 3 weeks off, they'll come back and then they'll go into what we call a return to training phase. And that's usually between 2 and 3 weeks. That's just general strength, getting your body used to weight training again.
Yep.
Nothing too crazy, build up that base. After that, we'll go into a general preparation phase where the focus will generally be on strength, because strength underpins everything.
Yep.
That's when we'll do the testing after that block and make that decision, because in the literature it's saying that 2 to 3 sessions a week of very specific resistance training focused at your phenomenology will improve within 6 weeks. In the academy program, our phases are around 3 weeks. So we say specific prep into early fight camp. That's a 6-week block where we're going to focus on your deficiencies. And in that last 3-week block leading into the fight, it's going to be about the things that help you win that fight. So it kind of changes the psychology of the athlete too, from going from things that they're not so good at. And in the last 3 weeks, we're giving them things they are good at. It's like, oh, feeling $1 million now. Let's get after it.
Yeah. For the listeners that aren't professional athletes or high-level athletes who maybe want to focus on that strength component of their own life, what's the rep ranges? What's, number of sets that you guys are kind of programming your athletes through?
So if they're focusing on their deficiencies?
Deficiencies in that strength, I guess, focus segment.
Gotcha. So it can vary. A lot of it comes down to load. So there's papers at the moment talking about minimal effective dose and particular methods that you can use to really maximize that. So as an example, right now, I've got a 6-month-old. I can't train like I used to. I've got 20, 30 minutes at lunch. I got to get that work done. So I'm using methods like rest pause, drop sets, timed sets, things that I can squeeze a maximum amount of work into to get myself stronger, but I've only got 30 minutes, so it can work.
Okay.
That really works well for general populations. For our athletes, it's probably a little bit much because they need to do their technical training as well and can't be too sore from it. So we tend to look at things like cluster sets at particular percentage of their 1RM. So if you lift 100 kilograms for a bench press, you probably need to lift 80% of that and above to get stronger. That's generally what it's about. Now, you could do anywhere from 3 to 5 sets of 1 to 5 reps, because if you're lifting at 80% of your 1RM, you shouldn't actually really be able to lift more than 5, maybe 6 reps. And a really cool thing that you can utilize, and this is athletes or general populations, even better than working out all the percentages and things like that, use the term called reps in reserve, or RIR. This basically is, if I was to ask you at the end of a set, how many more could you do? If you say 3 or more, the weight is too light. If you went to failure, it's too heavy. And it's a really, really simple way to adjust your set-by-set load, because now it's coming out that it's actually something called stimulating reps that are actually creating hypertrophy for your strength. So let's say you're doing a set of 5 reps. The first 1 or 2 aren't the most stimulating repetitions. It's more the 3, 4, and 5.
Well, yeah. And for everybody that doesn't understand what a cluster set is, can you describe that?
Yep. So cluster sets are a great way to give the body more exposure to the stimulus you're trying to provide. So if you want to get strong, and I said to you, you're going to do 3 sets of 3. Well, in total volume, that's only 9 repetitions at that load. So instead of 3 repetitions per set, I'm going to get you to do 2, 2, and 2. So that's 6 reps per set, but those 2, 2, 2 are separated by 20 to 30 seconds recovery. So you do your 2, rack the bar, have 20 to 30 seconds rest, do another 2, rack the bar, 20 to 30 seconds rest, another 2. That's 1 set. So now I've just snuck in 6 reps in 1 set. And so if I do that for 3 sets, I've now given my body exposure to 18 total reps in that session instead of just 6.
Yeah. In the same amount of time, theoretically.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. There's a very small rest period. So there's also more literature coming out now sort of saying that you can, by supersetting, utilizing supersetting, which is a really good idea for general populations for a number of reasons. But if you superset, usually what we term transverse, so upper and lower body, is a really good way to do it, but there's plenty of different ways to do it. But let's use this as an example. If I went bench press and a hamstring curl, when I finished my bench press, I'll give myself 30 seconds, go over to the hamstring curl, do that set. By the time I get back to the bench press, there's probably a good minute and a half that's passed while my body's recovered, and it's actually showing that that's going to be just as beneficial than giving yourself a 2-minute rest after the hamstring curl. So it's like paired supersets is what they're calling it. And this is just standard lifting, right? If you've been lifting for a long time, it's like, I've always done that. What are you talking about? But now,
100%.
yeah, we're always sort of told, like, oh no, you've got to rest a little bit longer. But as athletes or type A personalities, you don't want to rest for 2 minutes. You're like, man, I'll cool down. I'm ready to go. Let's get after it. Well, science is supporting that theory now. We can get after it. It's a great way to do it.
What's funny about that approach as well that I've learned probably in the last year is if I switch between exercises, my mind is focused on the other exercise. So I'm not focused on being sore from whatever I just did. And it almost gives me another fresher breath of like fresh air despite the time decreasing.
Right. And it's funny because speaking to some researchers about, 3 minutes between counter movement jump tests and stuff, I don't know about you, but I reckon I perform worse after 3 minutes. Like, I'm better after a minute. It's like my body's
I'm better where I'm
started to
almost slightly fatigued.
Yes. And it's interesting because I've spoken to a few MMA coaches who used to fight, and it goes back to their warm-ups backstage before their fights. Some guys want to do almost a proper first round and then go out and fight. And they feel that's when I'm ready to go. Others will say, if you did that to me, I'll fall off a cliff by the time I get to the cage. So this goes back to that athlete-centered approach. Like, what's good for you and I might be different to athlete C. Okay, that's cool, but we've got to understand there are differences, and some people might only want a minute rest, and they'll actually perform better than if you gave them a 3-minute rest.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely one that needs to shock like my central nervous system before I get out in a game, or else first 10 minutes I'll be huffing and puffing, my legs will be filled, and I'll be like, what
Worst
the
feeling.
hell? Even though I'm super fit, but yeah. No, it does go back to just kind of having that self-awareness component to this whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And find out what works for you, right?
Yeah. And so say UFC athlete, and this is just out of my curiosity, off season, doesn't have a fight coming up. How are you guys kind of structuring their programming and their weekly scheduling, going from strength and conditioning to that, that fitness component where you're working both aerobic and anaerobic systems? You also want to continue sport specific training because you can't take the foot off the gas too much on that end. So just a standard approach. What's that week looking like?
Well, here's where it's really different to most sports, is that maybe not in the academy in Shanghai because that's all in-house. So our MMA coaches structure everything and we fit in with that schedule, and it's beautiful, looks great. In Vegas, the athletes are actually in control of when they train or not. So we have very little to do with the technical coaches where we are. We do chat with them, obviously, and we get along with them really well, but they have their schedule and it'll change because there's so many people on the mats and people are fighting all over the place, so it's very hard to control and keep track of. So we as S&C coaches need to adapt as best as we can, and that's where using tools like accelerometers like GymAware, where we can read velocity, or looking at jumps to see if there's a decrease, will somewhat auto-regulate the athlete by them saying, look man, I'm pretty tired today and I can see it in your weights or how fast you move to that bar, and we can adjust it accordingly, because at the moment we haven't got a good answer for that.
Yeah. Wow.
I guess if we were looking at optimal, I could utilize the Shanghai facility. So because that looks awesome. So the way that we'll load it is like a moderate, high, low, or even sometimes a low, mod, high across the 6 days. And usually that coincides with a Wednesday and a Saturday, being just a half day, but purely sparring. So they can come in, focus on that, and then that's it. And then we'll adjust our strength and conditioning around that. So for example, they'll spar Wednesday. On a Tuesday afternoon with S&C, we want to make sure that's potentiating that next session. So that'll be pure power-based training for everyone. Monday and Thursday are the days that we look at getting after more of those deficiencies, and that is with regards to their conditioning as well. So not only do we use tier 1 diagnostics for their strength and power, we also look at diagnostics on an assault bike with gas analysis for both maximal alactic power, glycolytic power, and VO2 max. And so we have all the three energy systems there, and then we can look at their deficiencies in that component as well. So once we start moving into specific preparation, specific being specific to you as an individual fighter, what do you need to develop these next 6 to 8 weeks? That's when we'll start programming it in. Before that, we just got to build that base. We've got to look at predominantly aerobic capacity, but then also touching on things like alactic capacity as well, because Tuesdays, they're going to spar the next day. We don't want to overwork them with aerobic work, so that's a great day just to keep that theme of power, even with their energy system as well.
How does one continue to grow their aerobic base?
Fantastic question. So you can look at it two ways. So let's use the VO2 max as an example on the assault bike, which our Director of Sports Science, Dr. Roman Foman, has created a VO2 max test on the assault bike, and it's fantastic. It's about 8 minutes long.
It sounds horrible.
It is horrible. It's not as bad as the 1 minute glycolytic test, which is murderous. But we can get to that. So the VO2 max test, we'll give it. Most athletes have done a VO2 max test, and if there's listeners that haven't done it, basically it's looking at pushing you to your peak aerobic capacity until you quit. And that's usually about 8 minutes with us on the assault bike. And then what we can gain from that is what your estimated peak heart rate was, and then also how you best utilize your oxygen sources. And your body utilizes that. So one of the cool things we've found is, let's say you're finished your VO2 max and you've got a heart rate in the high 150s, 160s. It's not really that high, is it? For a peak heart rate, that's not actually that high. So now you look at it and you go, what happened? What let you down? What let you down was probably your neuromuscular system.
100%.
So now, as a conditioning prescription, we're going to look more at the neuromuscular stresses and how we can improve your muscles' ability to withstand fatigue alongside building that heart rate ability. But how important does that sound in MMA? If you're grappling, you're not running or really moving very fast at all, but your muscles are starting to fatigue really, really quickly. And your heart rate's probably not that high if you're a really good grappler because you're conditioned at that. So we're looking at ways to focus it sport-specific in some ways, but more energy system and the way that your body utilizes its energy specific. That's pretty cool.
Well, I mean, just thinking about the assault bike, I did assault bike workout 2 days ago that absolutely murdered my quads and my legs, but my heart rate only got up to 162.
There you go.
But I couldn't walk after. And so, yeah, but I'll do a running test or whatever it may be, and then my heart rate's up to 188, 190 something, and so how are you guys, what sort of tests or what sort of training programs, workouts are you doing on the assault bike to like increase that threshold, that alactic?
Well, so it could even be mixing up the modality. So if it's so we're utilizing near infrared spectrometry as well on the legs to see how it utilizes oxygen. And that's been really interesting as well. So as a really simple example, you're saying your legs were fried after being on the assault bike. A great intervention for you would be to crank up a watt bike up to level 10 and then do long intervals for, say, 3 minutes. If you can maintain nasal breathing, even better, because then you're getting a cardiorespiratory response from it. But we might actually program a particular wattage or RPM output for you to maintain for that 3 minutes. And so your legs are grinding. Your heart rate will obviously increase, but your legs will be burning. And then you take that resistance off and you do repeat efforts of that long interval. That would be something we would term physiological focused. So we're really looking at the heart and the lungs, the neuromuscular component without stress on the joints. So your off-beat conditioning. We also have a term mechanical prescriptions, which is where we are really actually going to add a little bit of stress to your joints. So that's where your running is, maybe your sled work. That's another good option. So we could do repeat sled pushes. We could do MAS running, maybe even on an incline to increase that neuromuscular requirement. So that's going to help build that capacity in your legs and the ability to maintain neuromuscular output and your muscle's ability to utilize that oxygen that it has.
All the UFC fighters I know, they're running all the freaking time.
Yeah,
And they're
and
on the hills all the time.
all the time. And I mean, it's one of those old school things, but I don't see a problem with it as long as it sits in nicely with the rest of your training week. So I think running has, and this is for me personally as well, running often gets us into that theta zone, right? That brainwave hertz that allows us, when you're driving and you go through a couple of green lights and you're like, fuck, I didn't even know if it was green or not.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just 10 minutes down. That's theta, right? So
Yeah.
I feel running has the same properties as that, and I know a lot of fighters feel that way too. They're not working too hard sometimes. They're just going for a couple of mile runs or a couple of kilometre runs at a steady pace. I don't really see anything wrong with that as long as it's not too frequent. And you remember that mechanical loading or that stress on your joints. I think they get a fair bit of that during grappling and stuff. So
Yeah, no kidding.
you know what I mean? Like, just find that balance, and then we're sweet. I don't think writing it off is needed at all.
Let's talk about getting heart rate up to a high level, because you're used to it. I'm used to it. It happens weekly for us and athletes, but for everybody else who's, general population working out, what would you advise? Is it amount of time? Is it days per week where you're doing dedicated work to elevate that heart rate? Maybe that it's at 80 to 90% range. That just standard weightlifting and cardio on the treadmill or the elliptical isn't going to accomplish.
Sure, there's definitely research out there saying that too much can be damaging, particularly for your mitochondrial density as well. So you actually will get to a point where you start killing them off. So it's almost like too much is damaging. Usually, if you're going to do it, then you'd want to give yourself a good 48 hours recovery between those bouts. So if you want to do it consistently, then maybe it's a case of mixing it up. It also depends what sort of modality you're doing it. Like, are you doing it with swimming and sprinting? In which case there's probably a little less stress on your joints, but it was really focused on that cardiorespiratory component. Or are you doing it because you're doing the Murph at CrossFit, which is going to be high-end joint stress, still awesome in terms of getting your heart rate up and getting that muscular adaptation, but you wouldn't want to do that back-to-back on days, right?
Yeah.
So it's about giving your body ample time to recover and adapt before you push it to that point again. Otherwise, you'll probably be doing more damage than good.
Let's go into recovery a little bit. What have you found from all your time with elite athletes? Kind of be like, give me those big rocks, those big pillars when it comes to nutrition and recovery. And you can even go into some of the modalities that you guys are using with the UFC PI to help augment recovery.
Sure. I think nutrition obviously is better left to the experts, but especially my wife's a sports dietitian, and whatever she tells me, I'm like, okay, I definitely know less than I thought I did.
Yep.
So I'm not going to comment too much on that area, but but timing is obviously crucial in that sense. And I think just being aware of it. So many athletes forget to eat, which is crazy, but they do. And so finding ways that fit in with your culture or with your time, because that's the hardest thing, right? I need you to eat this amount of calories for breakfast. Like, man, I'm going to throw that up at 9 o'clock when I have a session. So being smart about what works for your body, I think, is really crucial. In terms of just general recovery modalities, utilizing things like hot and cold baths, saunas, cryotherapy, photobiomodulation, Normatex, like there's a string of things. We did tap on the sleep at the start, which is obviously number one. Sleep and nutrition, the simplest things and the best things for you as well. I think all the other things are additional modalities. There's also, now there's research stating that the recovery that's most effective is the one that you like or feel the best, most comfortable with. I'll give you a great example of that. In China, we would set out their training week, whether it's technical training in the morning or S&C in the afternoon, and then after each of those sessions, they would be prescribed recovery. So what we were trying to do from that was, obviously, a lot of people have learned about don't go in the cold after a strength power session, it'll blunt your responses. I do believe that that's chronic. If you're doing that chronically, like after every strength and power session over time, you're going to find that happen. Doing it once or twice here and there won't affect it too badly. But we were trying to stay away from that. The problem was that in China, a lot of the Chinese females hated cold water. It's quite a cultural thing. Like they don't drink cold water; it has to be room temperature.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very much a cultural thing around health and wellness. So don't drink iced water; have it room temp. And here we are trying to impose Western research onto their cultural beliefs. And so they'd often get into the cold water about knee deep and then hang on to the railing that puts you in there. It's like, pretty sure you're not recovering at all from this modality. This is useless. So, that's what I mean by being more comfortable, most comfortable with. It's things that, obviously there's physiological adaptations you want to try and get from it. But at the same time, if you're doing that amount, how much more stress is that adding to that poor girl? So much more stress.
It's probably doing more damage.
Correct.
Yeah, doing more.
Exactly. So, and think of a sauna. Sauna is often looked at as a great recovery modality. It is, but it is also a stressor. It's putting the body through some kind of stress. So, how often are you doing it? What are you doing it after? Are you comfortable in heat? Someone asked me about how I like Vegas because it's so hot. I was like, I'm fine with it. I'm from Western Australia. It's hot all the time. But if you're from a winter place or a colder place, maybe you're from Alaska, Vegas would kill you.
You're going to hate it.
Yeah. So it's the same thing with the sauna. Temperature is so much more than just get in the cold bath and the hot bath. It's like, how comfortable are you, and how much more stress is that adding to your system? So I think that's a really important consideration if we go back to the start and we talk about the human component.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. We can look at the science all we want, but if the human doesn't feel that that's beneficial for them, it probably isn't.
Now, I'm happy you brought that up. I mentioned the sleep expert, Nick Littlehills. We spoke about there'll be times in between sessions or right before I arrive to a session where I'll sit in my truck and I'll scroll on my phone for 20 minutes. And I was telling him about these, and he's like, that's doing more good for you than harm. And that's because you're relaxed. Your brain frequency or waves or whatever the right terminology is has decreased a little bit. You're in a happy place, and it's allowing your body to just chill for a second. And whatever you're scrolling through on your phone, you're scrolling there for a reason. Maybe you like it. Maybe you want to read something. Maybe you want to learn, but you're enjoying it. And so just a simple, 20 minutes of me doing something different that isn't stressful, isn't thought provoking, isn't putting any load on my, cognitive, no cognitive stress. That's a form of recovery that is often so overlooked, and it's the easiest thing we can do.
And in fact is often demonized at
100%.
the moment. Yeah. And obviously there's things for that. Like if people put their highlight reels on Instagram and you start feeling sad about yourself, it's probably not so good. If you're doing it just before you go to bed, probably not so good. But when you're saying that you're doing it, it absolutely resonates with me as well. It's a way for us to turn those wheels off, turn the cogs from turning just for 20 minutes.
That's it.
Now we're good. Let's go.
Sometimes it's like we think there's this perfect solution, this big technology, this approach that is so standardized where everything these days is almost like dogmatic, especially like nutrition. He's animal-based, he's plant-based, he's keto, and that's the only freaking way. And because this athlete does it, that's the golden ticket. It's like, dude, find what works for you.
Yes, absolutely. And people like belonging as well, right? Like, I am this. This is what I do. It's almost like I've heard this in psychology circles as well, with people who, not necessarily in sport, but just in general, people who are always hurt, or their injuries, or something like that, and that's what they complain about. If they fix their body, then who are they? Like, what are they? That's what they identify as in terms of people know me as the person that always hurts himself or is always injured. And they obviously aren't doing that consciously. It's a subconscious thing, but it's a really interesting or thought-provoking process, right? Like, if you're always wondering, or if you're the stressful person and you're no longer stressing out, what does that make me? How do people identify and know me? Yeah, exactly.
It's tough, and that's one of the tough things about sport is the fact that it can so easily become your identity.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
It's
That's the scary part, right? And it's understanding there's more to the athlete than just them playing sport. I think um, one of the basketballers just recently, who won the MVP? Just had a
you're talking
mental blank.
not Luca, but
Dokic?
who was the guy from somewhere in the Middle East, right?
Yes. Yeah. Novak. No, I might be thinking of a tennis player. Anyway, he won the MVP, and he goes, basketball isn't all I do. I'm just very good at it. Something
Yeah.
along those lines. He says, I'm very good at it, so I go and do that. But then I've got all this other life over here, and I loved that. It was like, yeah, it's a really good approach.
And think about how well he's playing.
Yeah.
And I know that the best version of Christian Dyer on the rugby field is when I'm busy, happy, even stressed with other things in life, to the point where rugby becomes a smaller part of my life.
Yep.
And because of that, I used to spend hours and hours in the gym, hours on the training field, whatever it may be. Now I spend less, but my time focused on the time that I'm doing that, I'm more efficient, is what I'm trying to say.
Which is kind of the key, isn't it? When you look at all these things we've discussed, it comes down to how can we make things optimal in an efficient time frame. It's why we tested for strength and power and ESD diagnostics. We've got an hour. In fact, we looked at total training time with the academy in Shanghai, and strength and conditioning made up 14% of total training time. Right, and we're here trying to make a difference to the A of the FMA model, right? The athlete, we've got 14% of their training week to make a difference. We have not a single exercise to waste. It's the same thing with recovery. What is the most efficient? Can we get away with sleeping and that's it? How many times have you had a coach say, right, we had a bad game, 6 a.m. tomorrow, we're getting up, we're doing recovery? It's like, maybe just let us sleep. That would be kind of nice.
Yep. Don't overlook the little things.
Yeah, it's efficiency, right?
It really is. What about mental health with UFC athletes? Are you guys doing anything? Are they seeing people? Are they, consistently working on it?
Yeah, so the thing to know, I guess, about the UFC Performance Institute is that all our services are free for UFC rostered fighters. That also means that they can choose to use it or not. Now, they might use just physical therapy, they might just use sports science, they might use everything. One of those components is sports psychology, and we have two fantastic psychologists that work with whoever needs it. And they've got some really fantastic principles. You know, we even get them to come in and give our S&C department a talk about what they do and how they do it, so that we can actually help associate with those fighters when they're on the gym floor. So a really cool little trick is we want to be present, right? That's the thing that we hear the most of in sport. You want to be present, stop thinking about external factors. Well, how do we do that? Well, it's simple. Those little sticky dots that you can have, little sticky red dots, we just put them up around the gym. And whenever they see that, it's like, oh yeah, I've got to focus on this set. It's not about what's on my Instagram. It's not about making a phone call back home. Right now, right here, I'm in the gym. I've got a set on the trap bar deadlift that I've got to lift. Let's go do that now. And so we've sort of tried to tie in with the sports psychology as well, just a little bit, that we can bring it back home from and make it more of a global approach for them.
All right, a couple questions from some of my buddies through Instagram. When it comes to raw athleticism, who comes to mind in the UFC?
Michel Pereira.
Wow.
Okay. Unbelievable.
Really?
Unbelievable. Yeah.
From all aspects.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we can't say too much because, you know, in terms of data or anything like that, but I can definitely say he's an athlete and probably could have played multiple sports.
You guys ever screw around playing basketball, I don't know, pickleball, like with the athletes?
Yeah, we definitely do. And in fact, one of our S&C coaches loves his pickleball, and he's been at the UFC for quite a long time, and he often plays with the guys. And I think he wins. Put it that way.
It's always funny. It's always funny seeing like some of the best rugby players on my team, and then cross over to maybe it's basketball, maybe it's tennis, maybe it's golf, and seeing like who's actually good and who's shit.
Yeah, it's so true. I remember working with surfers, and they're pulling backside 360 air reverses, and I'm like, I don't even know how you're doing that. That's such a difficult move. And then you throw a tennis ball at them, and it's like, how is this possible?
Jeez.
That's the hardest thing I've ever seen in the water, and it can't catch a tennis ball. It's incredible.
Okay, best pound for pound fighter.
In my opinion,
Yep.
I, I know he just lost, but because he's Australian, I'm going with Alex Volkanovski
Used to
right
be
now.
a rugby league player.
Uh-huh. I thought that might go nicely with this theme of the podcast, but
And
yeah,
if I read correctly, that guy used to weigh 245 pounds.
yeah, yeah.
Jeez.
He's a beast.
Jeez.
So he
He-
went up just recently against Islam,
Yep.
upper weight class. Most people would have seen that if they follow it, and pretty close
No,
fight.
yep. No, close fight. I'm biased only because I trained with Islam twice,
Right.
but that was an incredible fight. And I mean, hats off to Volk because he's just a standout guy.
I agree. I
Took
agree.
that one on the chin.
Yep. Yep.
Who is one fighter you dream of working with?
Ooh. That's a good question. I don't really have one, to be honest.
Mm.
I think a lot of the crew that I've worked with, it's more about when I work with them realizing that this is the person I want to keep working with. Like the thing with MMA athletes are, we have to remember that a lot of them have come from not getting a great deal of assistance. Maybe it's I train at this gym, and then I go get my S&C from this gym, then I go see my dietitian, then my physio over here. So at the UFC PI, we have everything in one house, and they're really thankful for it. And for me,
Mm.
MMA athletes are some of the best to work with because they're just like, let's get after it. There's never, I can't be bothered. That never comes out of their mouth because it's such a consequential sport that they just want to give you 100%. So for me, it's
Cool.
actually all the fighters I've worked with have been really cool because of the attitude that they give me in the S&C floor. And I know that's probably not the answer someone wanted to hear, but
It's all right.
I've had some really cool experiences. Like Yuri Prohaska is a fantastic example of that, and he's just got the world champion mindset. It's beautiful to watch.
It's incredible. So, I mean, like you just touched on a little bit with the appreciation of life, but as much as you're teaching these athletes lessons in strength and conditioning and sport and performance, what are they teaching you about mindset and life and maybe the approach to your craft?
I think humility is the word that comes to mind working with a lot of these fighters. We all know they're killers, right? They're the best in the world at what they do, and what they do can be pretty violent. They're some of the kindest, most humble people I've ever met, not even just in sport, just in general. Like, that has blown me away. And that goes across to China when I worked with the Chinese athletes as well. And to me, that says a lot about martial arts. I feel like martial arts humbles you. There's always someone a little bit better. You've always been beaten up in some nice fashion in an MMA gym or whatever gym you go to. And I think it just teaches you humility, and that's definitely what I'm seeing.
Man. Well, what I love about talking to you now is that you have a genuine passion for what you do and you understand why you do it. And most people that I know and I talk to, they don't find that.
Mm.
And it's refreshing to continue to have these conversations with people who just enjoy what they're doing.
Thank you, mate.
And
That means a lot because it's I feel that's what helps create buy-in when I train an athlete as well, is that I genuinely care for what happens to them in their career and even just right now on the S&C floor. Like, I genuinely do care. And I think that's a big part of what I do or what our industry should be doing. And I don't know that that's always the case. I think some people potentially have a bit too much self in mind, but this really has to be a selfless craft in that you're trying to help the athlete-centered approach. What does this athlete need from you, and how can you give it to them without your ego, without just thinking you need to be right? And that's that bend and twist and coaching creativity that comes into it, right? Like, I want to hear what you have to say. If you want to work harder, let's get that going. If you want to back it off a little bit, I can do that too. Let's do what you need and what makes you feel like you can perform at your best.
but it's creating a space where that athlete feels confident to be upfront with you, Gavin, and be like, hey, this is what I feel. This is what I think. I'm actually a little fearful of maybe X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it all comes back to that self-awareness piece that we've touched on twice.
Yeah, absolutely. And self-confidence, right? That if I create this open space for you to tell me that I don't want to back squat because my back hurts, there's 1,000 alternatives. We don't have to back squat. Why do I need you to back squat? Because it's for my ego that this is in the program and we cannot change it no matter what. So if I open that up, then all of a sudden we've got a better program for you and potentially better results as well, because it's that conversation piece, that relationship that we have as athlete and coach to find the best way forward for you.
Yeah. And to cap it off, the big takeaway that solidified my already perception on performance being a lifestyle is everything you've talked about. You gave that analogy of the FMA, the athlete, and that has so many tangibles with life.
Mm-hmm.
And in any capacity, whatever you do, doesn't matter the industry. If CEO, you own a gym, you're a teacher, you're a lawyer, doesn't matter. Like, the approach you have is so similar to what you, Gavin, do and what I do as a rugby player. Like, regardless of job title.
Yes.
You wake up every day, you have an intent to go be better. You have an intent to try to have a small win every day. You understand that not every day is going to be perfect. Like, that whole mental piece, I think, is the biggest thing that I'm learning that is transferable in all industries of life.
Absolutely. And that I've got this saying that everyone is king. And what that sort of means is no matter, let's say you go into a room full of people, every person in that room is probably better at you in something. And that's not to make yourself feel bad. It's to say, well, what can I learn from each one of these people in here so that I get better? And to do that, I need to ask questions. I don't need to talk. I need to ask questions. I already know what I know. So if I ask you a question, then I'm going to get more knowledge, and that makes me better. So it's a humility, again, like the fighters have, that enables you to do that, because if you need to tell everyone how good you are at something or all the things that you know, you're not hearing anything. You're not getting any more information, so you're not getting better. And that sort of goes back to what you were just saying then. Every day we're trying to get that a little bit better. You might not have the best day, but what can you gain from other people? It doesn't always have to be you that's trying to discover these things. It can be from anyone, anywhere. You've just got to ask questions.
Well said, man. Hey, I gotta really say thank you for your time, your experience, your expertise, and just opening up on your life and everything you've learned.
I appreciate it, mate. Again, thanks so much for being patient with me. We finally got there, and it was a great chat. I really enjoyed it, mate. And best of luck with the season ahead for you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Gavin. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, mate.